The beer mug shattered against the wooden floor with a violent crack that silenced the oak barrel grill instantly. All conversations died. The clatter of cutlery stopped, and even the classic rock tune from the corner jukebox seemed to hold its breath. "You think you're something special." Ripper Vance's voice cut through the sudden quiet like a blade. His massive hand wrapped around the collar of the small woman who'd been wiping down tables. The snake tattoo coiling around his thick neck seemed to writhe as he pulled her closer, his breath reeking of whiskey and menace. "I asked you a simple question, sweetheart. This place pays protection, or this place burns. Which one's it going to be?" Amara kept her brown eyes fixed on the floor, her body language screaming submission, even as 10 members of the Iron Serpent's motorcycle club rose from their seats, forming a predatory circle around her. She was maybe 5'4" in her worn sneakers, her white server's shirt hanging loose on her slight frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look even younger than her 35 years. Everything about her whispered, ordinary, forgettable, weak. But in exactly 15 minutes, Ripper Vance would be on his knees, begging for forgiveness. The tension in the oak barrel grill had been building for 20 minutes before that glass shattered. The Iron Serpents had rolled in just after 8 surup, their Harleys announcing their arrival with a thunderous roar that made every patron in the small roadside diner tense up. This wasn't their first visit to establishments along the highway near Fort Liberty, and their reputation preceded them like a dark cloud. 3 bars in the past month had mysteriously caught fire after refusing their protection services. 2 owners had ended up in the hospital with injuries that the victims claimed came from accidents. Amara had watched them enter, while she methodically folded napkins at the service station. Her movements were precise and economical. Cody, the 25-year-old bartender, had immediately started sweating when he saw the skull patches on their leather vests. "That's them," he'd whispered to Amara. "The Iron Serpents. They're the ones who burned down Rossetti's place in Fayetteville." She'd simply nodded, continuing to fold napkins into perfect triangles, each one identical to the last. Cody had noticed this about Amara in the 6 months she'd worked at the Oak Barrel. Everything she did had an almost military precision to it, the way she wiped down tables in perfect grid patterns, the way she arranged condiments with geometric accuracy, the way she never had her back to the door for more than a few seconds at a time. Ripper Vance had made his entrance like a conquering king. His 6'3" frame swaggered through the door with his arms spread wide. The snake tattoo that gave him his nickname started at his jaw and disappeared into his leather vest, and his shaved head gleamed under the bar's warm amber lights. His 9 companions spread out behind him in what Amara quietly noted was a tactically sound dispersal pattern, covering exits, maintaining sight lines, and establishing dominance over the space. "Evening, folks," Ripper had announced to the dozen or so regular patrons, his voice carrying that particular tone of false friendliness that preceded violence. "Don't mind us. We're just here for a friendly drink and a little business discussion." The regulars, mostly veterans from the nearby base and local blue-collar workers, had shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sheriff Miller, a grizzled 55-year-old who'd done 2 tours in Iraq before coming home to serve and protect, had been nursing a coffee at the corner booth. He'd set down his cup slowly, his weathered hand moving to rest near his hip, where his service weapon would have been if he'd been on duty. Amara had approached their table with her order pad, keeping her eyes down and her voice soft. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" That's when the first sign of trouble had sparked. One of the bikers, a wiry man with meth-rotted teeth, had slapped her backside as she walked past. "How about you start with a smile, sweetheart? You look like someone died." She'd simply stepped out of reach with a fluid movement that looked accidental, but wasn't, continuing to take their orders without acknowledging the assault. Cody had started to move from behind the bar, his young face flushed with anger. But Amara had caught his eye and given an almost imperceptible shake of her head. The bikers had ordered beer, lots of it, and Amara had served them efficiently and quietly. That's when she'd felt the weight of Ripper's attention settle on her like a physical thing. She'd been wiping down a nearby table when he'd called out, "Hey, server girl, where's Henderson? We need to discuss some business." "Mr. Henderson is in Charlotte for the week," Amara had replied quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I'm just covering shifts." "Well then." Ripper had stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over her. "I guess you'll have to relay a message for us. Tell Henderson that the Iron Serpents are offering our protection services to this fine establishment. $5,000 a month, and we guarantee nothing bad happens to this place." Amara had continued wiping the already clean table. "I'll let him know you stopped by." That's when Ripper's demeanor had shifted from fake friendly to genuinely menacing. He felt disrespected. A small, black server was acting calm in his presence. "I don't think you understand, sweetheart," he'd sneered, his voice dropping. "This isn't a social call. This is a business requirement. Every bar from here to Raleigh is under our protection. Those that refuse—" He'd pulled out a lighter, flicking it open and closed with practiced menace. "Well, accidents happen. Electrical fires, gas leaks, tragic stuff. I understand," Amara had said softly. "But I can't make decisions for Mr. Henderson. I just serve drinks and clean tables." The formation the bikers had unconsciously taken around her had a name in military tactics encirclement. But there was a weakness in their positioning that Amara had cataloged automatically. The one by the jukebox had his weight on his bad knee. She'd noticed his slight limp when he walked in. The two by the pool table were focused on intimidation rather than observation, missing Sheriff Miller's slow shift to a better defensive position. Ripper himself was standing too close. Inside the reactionary gap, a mistake born of overconfidence. Amara's fingers had found the small piece of metal hanging from the chain around her neck, hidden beneath her loose shirt. The worn dog tag was warm against her skin, a reminder of who she used to be, who she was trying not to be anymore. 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, medals and scars, all of it locked away in a storage unit along with her dress blues and her gunnery sergeant chevrons. She'd come to the Oak Barrel looking for quiet, for peace, for a place where she could just be invisible and serve drinks to people who didn't know what it felt like to have blood on their hands. But trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding Marines, even retired ones trying to disappear into civilian life. "Look," Ripper had said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I'm trying to be nice here, but you're making this difficult. How about this? You seem like a smart girl. You convince Henderson to see things our way, and maybe I'll throw in a little bonus for you. What do you make here? Minimum wage plus tips I could make sure you're taken care of." "Thank you, but I'm fine with my current arrangement," Amara had replied, finally looking up at him. Her brown eyes were calm, almost serene, which seemed to infuriate him more than defiance would have. That's when he'd reached out and wrapped his meaty fingers around her upper arm, squeezing hard enough to leave bruises. "Listen here. You stuck-up little... I'm going to have to ask you to take your hand off the lady." Sheriff Miller had stood up, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Even in civilian clothes, he had that unmistakable bearing of a career soldier. Ripper had laughed, not releasing Amara's arm. "And what are you going to do about it? Old man, you're off duty, out of your jurisdiction, and outnumbered 10-1. Sit back down before you get hurt." But the sheriff hadn't backed down, and several other patrons. Amara noticed at least 5 were wearing unit pins or military tattoos had shifted in their seats, ready to back his play. The air in the oak barrel had grown thick with the promise of violence. "Sheriff Miller, it's okay," Amara had said softly, using his name. "These gentlemen were just leaving." That's when Ripper had made his crucial mistake. He'd yanked her closer, his other hand reaching for her collar. "You don't tell us when we leave. We leave when we're good and ready. And right now, I'm thinking we need to teach this whole bar a lesson about respect." The sound of scraping chairs filled the diner as more patrons stood. Cody gripped the baseball bat they kept behind the counter. But Ripper's attention was entirely focused on Amara, on establishing dominance, on breaking what he saw as inappropriate resistance from someone who should have been cowering. "You know what your problem is," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You think you're better than us. Think you're too good to show proper respect. Maybe I need to remind you of your place." His free hand grabbed the front of her shirt, bunching the fabric in his fist. Amara remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her eyes steady. To everyone watching, she looked like a terrified server trying not to provoke more violence. But Sheriff Miller, with his 2 combat tours worth of experience, saw something else. The way her weight had shifted to the balls of her feet, the way her hands had positioned themselves, the way she'd angled her body to create space for movement. "Last chance," Ripper growled. "You're going to call Henderson right now and tell him he's got a new business partner, or things are going to get very unpleasant for everyone here." "I can't do that," Amara said simply. That's when the shirt tore. The sound of ripping fabric was shocking in its finality. The white cotton parting from collar to mid-chest as Ripper yanked with all his considerable strength. Amara stumbled backward, the ruined shirt hanging open, revealing the black tank top underneath. But it was what that tank top revealed that changed everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs, as if the universe itself needed a moment to process what had just been exposed. Across Amara's back, visible where the fabric had been pulled taut, was a work of art that told a story of service, sacrifice, and elite warrior status. The eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps spread majestically across her shoulder blades. The detailed work was so precise you could make out individual feathers on the eagle's wings. But it was the text beneath that made several veterans in the bar gasp audibly. "First Force Recon" was inked in bold letters, marking her as a member of one of the most elite special operations units in the Marine Corps. Below that, her designation, Gunny A. Johnson 0311, the military occupational specialty code for infantry, the tip of the spear. The tattoo was only part of the story. Surrounding it were scars, the kind that told their own tales to those who knew how to read them. A puckered bullet wound near her left shoulder blade, the telltale marks of shrapnel along her ribs, a long, jagged scar that disappeared beneath the tank top's hem, suggesting a blade wound that had required serious medical attention. Ripper Vance stood frozen, his hand still clutching the torn fabric, his mouth slightly open as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. Behind him, his fellow iron serpents had gone equally still. The predatory confidence drained from their faces like water from a broken cup. "Force Recon," Sheriff Miller breathed, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. "Holy hell!" The transformation in Amara's bearing was subtle but unmistakable. She hadn't moved, hadn't taken a fighting stance, but something in the way she held herself had changed, like a switch being flipped from civilian to warrior. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost its soft, submissive quality. It was cold steel. "Mr. Vance," she said, using his real name, which she shouldn't have known. I believe you owe me an apology for destroying my property. The shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable, like the pressure change before a thunderstorm. Ripper's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, the dawning realization that he had made a catastrophic error. But a lifetime of bigotry and misplaced pride was a hard thing to overcome. The shock was quickly replaced by a sneer, twisted by his own prejudice. A tattoo, he spat, trying to regain control. Some ink doesn't change what you are. He looked her up and down with disgust. You're still just a woman, a black woman, playing dress-up in a man's world. Think that makes you tough? The air grew even colder. The insult wasn't just directed at Amara, it was a slap in the face to every person in that room who wore or had worn a uniform. It was no longer about a biker gang shaking down a diner. It was about fundamental disrespect. "Richard Vance," Amara said, her voice dangerously calm, "dishonorably discharged from the Army's 82nd Airborne Division 10 years ago for theft and assault. Founded the Iron Serpents 5 years ago. Currently a person of interest in 4 arson cases and 2 counts of aggravated assault." She paused, letting the information sink in, each fact a hammer blow. "I make it my business to know who's threatening the establishments in my area of operation." Ripper's face turned pale. How do you know that?" From a corner booth, a grizzled man in his 60s slowly stood up. He had a quiet authority about him. Amara had served him coffee every Tuesday for 6 months, never knowing he was Colonel Matthews, retired, a Green Beret legend in the Fort Liberty community. "Gunny Johnson," he said, his voice a low rumble of command. "I remember the reports. Operation Dragon's Tooth, Kandahar Province. You held that forward operating base for 36 hours against overwhelming odds after your unit was ambushed. The Iron Serpents were backing toward the door now, their earlier formation completely broken. But they found their path blocked by 5 men who had quietly repositioned themselves. Each one had the bearing of someone who'd seen real combat, not the bar fights the bikers were used to. "Leaving so soon?" asked one of them, a Hispanic man with sergeant stripes tattooed on his forearm. "You haven't apologized to the lady yet." Ripper's face flushed red, caught between humiliation and his need to maintain face. "Look, we didn't know she was... Known what?" Amara stepped forward, and despite being nearly a foot shorter than Ripper, he took an involuntary step back. "That I bled for this country, that I earned the right to be treated with basic human dignity, or just that I could hurt you in ways you can't even imagine." Cornered and enraged, Ripper's last shred of control snapped. His prejudice boiled over into blind fury. "I don't care what you are," he roared. "You're nothing." One of his men, a jittery biker near the door, misinterpreted the rising tension as a signal to escalate. His hand darted inside his leather vest, and the distinct, menacing click of a switchblade opening echoed in the silent diner. The situation had just changed. It was no longer about intimidation. It was about deadly force. Every veteran in the room tensed, their training kicking in. The line had been crossed, and now there was no going back. The metallic click was a punctuation mark, ending all possibility of a peaceful resolution, before the biker with the knife could even take a step. Amara moved. She was a blur of contained violence. One moment she was standing in the center of the room, the next, she had closed the distance. Her right hand shot out, not in a punch, but with an open palm, striking the man's wrist with the force of a hammer. A sickening crack echoed as the bones snapped. The switchblade clattered to the floor. As he screamed, her left elbow drove into the side of his neck, and he collapsed in a heap, unconscious before he hit the ground. It took less than 2 seconds. The remaining iron serpents were paralyzed, their brains unable to comprehend the sheer speed and efficiency of the takedown. They weren't bar fighters, they were predators who relied on fear. And for the first time, they were the ones who were afraid. Seeing his enforcer fall and his authority evaporate, Ripper's face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage. All his racist venom and wounded pride boiled over. "I'll kill you," he bellowed, lunging forward and throwing a wild haymaker punch meant to shatter bone. Amara didn't retreat. She flowed. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, letting the punch sail harmlessly past her ear. Using his own momentum against him, she gripped his extended arm, twisted, and dropped her weight. Ripper screamed as a fire of agony shot through his shoulder joint in a single, fluid motion. She spun him around and drove a knee into the back of his thigh, buckling his leg. Ripper crashed to his knees, forced into the very position of submission he had tried to inflict upon her. He was trapped, his arm locked in a hold that threatened to tear it from its socket if he moved an inch. He was utterly and completely helpless. Amara leaned in close, her voice a low, chilling whisper in his ear. "You wanted to teach me about my place. You wanted a lesson in respect." She applied a fraction more pressure, and a choked sob escaped his lips. "This is respect. It's earned. You will never have it." The sound of handcuffs clicking broke the spell. Sheriff Miller stood over them, his expression grim. "Richard Vance, you're under arrest for assault, extortion, and assault with a deadly weapon." He looked at the other patrons who had witnessed Ripper's tirade. "And given the nature of your comments, we'll be discussing a hate crime enhancement with the district attorney." The other veterans, moving with practiced coordination, helped the sheriff secure the rest of the stunned and compliant bikers. The fight was over. The Mung Sha Sat were broken. In the quiet aftermath, as the police cruisers arrived to take the gang away, Colonel Matthews approached Amara. "Your peace and quiet is over, Gunny," he said, his voice filled with respect. "The whole county will know by sunrise." Amara looked around the diner, not at the mess, but at the faces of the patrons, Cody, the regulars, the other veterans. They weren't looking at her with fear or pity, but with a profound, shared understanding. She picked up the torn remains of her server shirt. For months, she had used it to hide. Now, it was a symbol of what she had almost lost by hiding. "Peace isn't found in hiding, Colonel," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's made by standing your ground." She looked at the front door of the oak barrel grill, a new sense of purpose settling over her. "This is my post now, and a Marine never abandons their post." She had come to this small town seeking to disappear, but instead, she found her new mission. Not in a war zone overseas, but in a roadside diner in North Carolina. She was no longer just Amara, the quiet server. She was Gunnery Sergeant Johnson, retired, and she was on watch. Thank you for following this story. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. If you'd like more inspiring stories about justice and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll be back tomorrow with another must-see story you won't want to miss.